Whether at home or work, life is about relationships. Welcome to Small Change, Big Dividends with your host, Branch Isole. Small Change, Big Dividends shares steps, tools, and tips for personal career and spiritual growth. So please welcome the host of Small Change, Big Dividends, Branch Isole.
What's absent in so many lives today that allows and encourages a world of 8 billion people to continue to struggle? If we remove the social, economic, religious, and political from the equation, we're left with the individual, you and me, and perhaps those closest and most dear to us. But why are so many at odds with each other, with ourselves? You see, stress, struggle, pressure, and conflict have been part of humanity's journey and the human condition since our beginnings. And as we've been peppered with opportunities to grow through successes and failures, we've discovered that we're each a combination of mind, body, spirit, and soul. Now, the first two, mind and body, we recognize easily. However, our soul and spirit, parts of our humanity that are often somewhere in the background of our thinking, or dwelling deeper in the recesses of who we are. You see, soul and spirit are not always evident at the forefront of our thinking, activities, choices, and consequences. So we wonder, what makes people tick? And more importantly, what's missing from this tick-tock in so many lives today? Well, what's missing is a cognition that our soul houses an inactive spirit. But what's the difference between an active and an inactive spirit? Well, we're going to be examining that today. Because when we embrace, recognize, and use all parts of our being, that is, mind, body, soul, and spirit, we become more complete, more balanced. With a reactivated spirit, we're able to see the world for what it truly can be. Coming to you from deep in the forest, near the banks of the Ouachita River, you're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends on the Bold Brave Media TV and Talk Global Network. I'm your host, Branch Isole. Small Changes, Big Dividends is a show where your questions are part of the program. So if you have a question, call our toll-free number, 1-866-451-1451. Or email your question to my website, branchisole.com, anytime during the week. Each week, I share mana'o with listeners from around the world. And on Small Changes, Big Dividends, we talk about personal, career, and spiritual Christianity essentials for growth-filled living. Today, I'm going to share some small changes that can pay big dividends in your relationships and in your life. Because life is about relationships, but it's healthy relationships that encourage and embrace growth. You see, we are each a universal unit of electrically charged energy. And as God's omniscient power, as creator of the universe, we are each manifested as human in the womb of our mother, where we become mind, body, soul, and spirit. As part of life's energy, our spirit of origination is in its essence from God. And the spirit of originality that we arrived with in this life is only partially active, meaning it's active to a certain capacity that it soon learns from right versus wrong. And as we grow, as we become accustomed to and are socialized by the laws of our society, that determines what right and wrong as a fundamental tenet for that society's legal framework will be. And most of us soon experience reward and punishment as the application of right and wrong. You see, each partially activated spirit recognizes right and wrong by its community or society standards. Its partiality makes it inactive, not allowing it to identify ethics and morals as the grounding purpose behind the veil of right and wrong, reward and punishment. So, how do we reactivate our connection with God? Well, this is simply accomplished through a new spiritual relationship with Christ Jesus. Because God's spirit of originality is the spirit of Christ. In John 4:24, we're told that God is spirit. And just as Jesus was human, possessing God's spirit, we too have the capacity to acquire and receive God's spirit more fully as we experience life. We are spirit in origination, just as Jesus is. And God's spirit abides fully in Father and Son. Therefore, just as we came from and by Him as Creator, our spirit of originality has the capacity to reactivate in order to use His spiritual strength as our own. You see, by knowing and accepting this premise, the question mankind has to ask is, why are we here? Well, I believe the answer is quite simple. We are here to know God exists, and then know His character and nature by acknowledgement of that in human form in Jesus as the Christ, the Messiah. So, what's the framework we need to use to reactivate and use His spiritual strength as our own? Well, it's by invitation, it's by listening, and it's by responding. So when we're ready to start a personal relationship with God through the Spirit of Christ, what do? Well, Jesus Himself tells us in Matthew 7, He says, ask, seek, knock. By inviting Jesus into our life when we ask, He tells us in John 14:16, I will ask the Father, and He will give you an advocate, the Spirit of truth, to help you and be with you forever. And then in verse 26, He follows it up, the advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you all things and remind you of everything I've said. So when we reactivate our inactive spirit of origination that we were born with, and we reactivate it through the Spirit of Jesus Christ, which is the Spirit of God, then we have reconnected with God. And therefore, our spiritual reactivation receives God's guidance of how we now can use His spiritual strength that now abides in us. So how do we do it? Well, again, we ask. But this time, our question is, what would Jesus do? You see, every time you're faced with a situation, now as a child of God, you can ask, Jesus, in this situation that I now find myself, what would you do? And His Spirit guides us and leads us. He says in John 16:13, when the Spirit comes, He will guide you into all truth and tell you what is to come. So we invite, we receive, we ask, then we listen. You see, God's Spirit within us will answer by giving us direct knowledge of the actions and consequences of the choices that we make. When we choose to start a spiritual relationship with God, His desire for us is to know Him and be connected to Him. But to do this, we must embrace spiritual surrender in order to act upon our decision. So when we ask, what would Jesus do if He were standing next to me? His guidance from within your reactivated spirit will reveal the outcomes facing you in the decision or choice you're making should you choose your old life, your old pattern behaviors that you're so comfortable with. The ones that were always about, well, what's in it for me? And as our counselor, our advocate, our guide, the Holy Spirit, He shares with us pending consequences should we choose our old pattern world's ways. You see, God, as a loving parent, remembers our choice to be His child, guided by His spiritual strength when we now need Him and call upon Him most. But it's in our obedience to His will, by choosing to emulate Jesus in thought, word, and deed, that we've entrusted and expected to act upon His spiritual advocacy. You see, the grounding of free will is when we choose to respond the way He would, that choice is the blessing. The reward is when His Spirit dwells with ours, and yet we still choose the world's path. So now the question becomes, what will God do? Will He hold this against us? Right? We were enticed to respond spiritually, but we slandered and fell off, and we're back where we started. But what does God think now? It's a resounding no. Once we've invited Jesus into our life and received His Holy Spirit to reactivate ours, He's with us from that moment on. And as a believer and a follower, we're forgiven our transgressions, but now we have His Spirit living within us, so we can see those transgression consequences before they actually happen. And having made a decision to follow Christ, if we now decide not to listen by still choosing the world's ways, Galatians 6 tells us what to expect. We reap what we sow. God's Spirit will guide you in your choices if you have a desire to listen. We're going to take our first break. When we come back, we're going to be talking about how the world balances itself. You're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends on the Bold Brave Media TV and Talk Global Network. I'm your host, Branch Isole. I'll be right back.
What if there were a super tiny device that could diagnose the brain and is smaller than a single human hair? What if you could see inside the brain to help an epilepsy patient during surgery or to help the fight against Parkinson's disease? Dr. Patricia Broderick is proud to announce the Broderick Probe, a biomedical and electronic breakthrough. Imagine a probe to help with the understanding and potential cure of brain-related diseases. To learn more, listen live to the Easy Sense radio show with host Dr. Broderick, Wednesdays 7 p.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave Media Network and TuneIn Radio. And to help support the Broderick Foundation, please go to EasySense.com and learn how, with your help, we can fight these horrific brain disorders. That's EasySense.com to learn more and help support the Broderick Foundation. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness. Unlock your full potential with limitless growth. Published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them. Rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies. Find settings that allow them to be the most productive and track their progress towards accomplishing goals. Listen to John Hawkins' My Strategy, Saturdays, 1 p.m. Eastern on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends. I'm your host, Branch Isole. The universe is always in balance, and by its laws, it self-corrects to a state of balance or near balance continuously. Well, the same can hold true for each of us. Think about a relationship you have that may currently be out of balance. Why is it unbalanced? Well, it's most likely because each partner has their own desires, plans, or agendas. So, how does one achieve balance? Well, we begin with 3 simple steps. First, we activate our spiritual relationship with Christ. Second, we come from our higher loving self. And third, we use truth as our guidepost or compass. It's simple. Do these 3, and stress, struggle, and pressure will melt away and cease to exist in your life as much as you desire to be so. So you say, Branch, how does this happen? When our spirit is reactivated, the veil in our life is lifted and we see truth in our world. You see, with God's Spirit now within you, all of reality's truth is revealed to you. And this becomes the pivotal and crucial moment. Because now, with our new choice, every new challenge is just simply a test of whether or not we will embrace truth. Now, this may sound easy until we realize that our world operates on lies, falsehoods, and fabrications. And when we embrace balance between our humanity and our spirituality, we start to see opportunities to grow in personal, business, and career lives. Okay, you say, so Branch, how does this work? Well, in everyday life, in every life, many come to learn and practice tried and true methods or tactics throughout life. Whether in personal or business situations, humans respond in very practiced and often predictable ways because our behaviors become ingrained as practice responses are often more repeated. And as their repetition comes to rest with us, they become our habit of response. But if practice makes perfect, why do so many struggle? You see, the zone of familiarity easily evolves into automatic responses. And this gives an uneasy comfort to issues or problems. And for some, it's detrimental or can be disastrous in the relationship. So even if we know how, we need to understand why to alter or correct these deteriorating situations. So what can we do to ensure that our relationships at home or business remain vital and productive if we sense things are out of sync? Well, we have to first ask, can they be fixed? And then we have to go about accomplishing the needed change. Change, you say. Now, let me ask you, are you a different person today than you were 5 years ago? 10 years ago? 20 years ago? Well, hopefully your answer is yes. If you're in business, your answer needs to be yes, because businesses and industries change over time. They have to. If you're a business owner or an entrepreneur, change is inevitable and necessary for your growth. You see, your clients and customers want change. Your employees want change. Different countries' economies change. Technology loves change, and people actually have the capacity to change. But to embrace opportunities to change in order to grow and stay on top of any field or endeavor takes understanding and applying the process for responding for growth and new change at home and at work. So, what are these keys? Again, we need to look behind the veil to see what motivates us to respond and react in the ways that we do. When we understand the whys, the hows become self evident. And understanding the whys engages people to more quickly evaluate our needs, our wants, our desires. So, what are these essential keys? Well, let's first look at 3 tips that we can use to improve any relationship. These illustrate how small changes can pay big dividends. So, first, we acknowledge that attitude, belief, and perception are both ours and other people's. We replace old pattern responses that we've used so long, and we now become more diplomatic expert in reading any situation and always responding politely and civilly, no matter who it may be. Next, we recognize 3 essential elements for every project's success. Those are direction, stability, and power. Now we can employ the 3 pillars of interpersonal growth. Those are love, approval, and agenda. And finally, we realize there's 5 basic motivators behind every decision that we make. And those are need, want, status, love, and fear of loss. You see, awareness of these will guide your participation in relationships, both personal and career. You're going to be a new you with new responses, more truthful responses. And that can only mean growth for you and for the relationship. These foster growth and interaction. They become a ballast keel for your success. And the undergirding, as we now learn, is all of these are supported by spiritual grounding. That's why when we activate our spirit and knowledge and acknowledge God, our life is never the same. Many people think and believe the world is a place of goodness and light, where evil and corruption only have a sliver of presence. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. The fact is, our world is a place of evil and corruption under the guise and guidance of men. And the sole glimmer of hope for the world, and therefore for us in the world, is God's spiritual presence. Why? Because the world's ways are designed and implemented by men whose dictates are grounded in greed and cruelty. Now, knowing this, one might think God's intervention would be decisive with the finality in daily life. However, there's a problem with this false premise. You see, the ways of the world run rampant against all hope and desire for your relationship with God. And although it's through suffering that many people often turn to God, because he doesn't respond immediately, to protracted delusions or disappointments, many force themselves even further away from God. Now, why? Well, far too many have their experiences grounded in religions and religious attempts to convince people to believe in and accept God by using images, language, or descriptions that are always coupled with threats of damnation, to extort allegiance with common pronouncements that perpetuate threats from God as the reward for sin and disobedience. You see, many think of religions as a cudgel, all or nothing, all God or no God. God, on the other hand, wants us to know and understand life's interactive essence is rooted in the balance of us as human and as spirit. But how do we as humans, in our physicality and as spirited souls, come to learn to use love, compassion, and mercy? You see, the vices and volitions of daily living are purposed to entice us, to embolden us, and to encourage us to willingly become part of the world's wanton ways. That's who we are in our nature. That's humanity's test, is to be more than it came here as. And this is why the world promotes its own and rewards those who use its ways to control, to coerce, or to victimize. Both the world and religions effectively use fear, shock, and punishment, often attributed to or from God, as weapons against his own love. And it's in this conflict, this battle between the natural man and woman and the spiritual man and woman, that the foundational discovery for each of us is to participate and embrace the world's ways. That's what the world wants us to do, is to embrace its ways, because then we can go through layers of tests, trials, and challenges. And the more we become implicit in our world, and at the same time, we become victims of its harshness. And so many turn to God as a last resort, hoping for relief. And it's here that the world redoubles its efforts. And even without knowing it, we become targets of attempts to dissuade us from establishing or reestablishing a spiritual relationship with God through Christ. Our levels of comfort in a world can make new spiritual growth likely difficult. And yet God waits. This may be one of the most underappreciated facts in spiritual life, that God waits. He waits on our response each time we leave the path and come back. Will we abandon God's path because we think he will abandon us by not answering, so that we again succumb to the challenges of our old pattern responses and our old behavior life? And in doing so, allow that siren call of comfortable misery to continue? Or do we gather ourselves, the muster of our strength of spirit, and look closer through self-reflection? You see, the goal of the Spirit is always to start or restart us on the path, and then help us stay the course. But by doing so, life is life, and we will go through hardship. But his spiritual strength now abiding within us reactivates our spirited soul. This is where many stumble. So what will we do? Go back to church and fall into a well-trod cycle of disappointments, accusations, guilt, and shame? Or we'll find out right after this commercial break. You're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends on the Bold Brave Media TV and Talk Global Network. I'm your host, Branch Isole. I'll be right back.
What if there were a super tiny device that could diagnose the brain and is smaller than a single human hair? What if you could see inside the brain to help an epilepsy patient during surgery or to help the fight against Parkinson's disease? Dr. Patricia Broderick is proud to announce the Broderick Probe, a biomedical and electronic breakthrough. Imagine a probe to help with the understanding and potential cure of brain-related diseases. To learn more, listen live to the Easy Sense radio show with host Dr. Broderick, Wednesdays 7 p.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave Media Network and TuneIn Radio. And to help support the Broderick Foundation, please go to EasySense.com and learn how, with your help, we can fight these horrific brain disorders. That's EasySense.com to learn more and help support the Broderick Foundation. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness, Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them. We discover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals. Listen to John Hawkins' My Strategy, Saturdays, 1 p.m. Eastern on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends. I'm your host, Branch Isole. So what do we do with our newfound wisdom rooted in truth? Well, first we might ask, what is wisdom? Scripture tells us the fear, meaning the respect or reverence of the Lord, is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. You see, a spiritual relationship with God will provide knowledge of who He is and how He would have us respond in our daily lives. Remember, now that He's indwelt, we can call upon His guidance at any time. So what do we do with this spiritual guidance remains our decision. We can embrace it or we can ignore it. But once we've reactivated our spirit with His presence, He will never abandon us. By inviting Jesus into our life, we become a child of God once more. And as Creator, God's concern is for all of humanity. However, when we are born again in the Spirit of Christ, we become recipients, by right and privilege, to rely on God's spiritual strength and depend on His guidance whenever we need or desire. And by His grace, we are now considered His child once again, same as Jesus. So once you start a spiritual relationship with the Lord, His spiritual strength is available to you whenever you ask. And He will not abandon you. He understands, as prodigal children, we each learn and grow from experiences. And as a loving parent, He waits for our life experiences to enlighten us that we have options. As a loving parent, He smiles approvingly when we choose to be guided by His Spirit. You see, there's a key element in this process that at first may seem uncomfortable. because we haven't had that opportunity nor called on the Lord's Spirit. So we don't know what to expect or if he'll even answer. But know this, as a child of his and as a loving parent, he will answer. He will always respond to those who call on him. The love of God is so great that every time we interact with his Spirit, he responds. And this is the blessing of a spiritual relationship. The farther down the spiritual path we walk, and the more we become aware of his presence and support, the more we become confident and comfortable to emulate his desires for us for a more blessed and protected life. And how do we do that? We emulate the thoughts, words, and deeds of Jesus Christ. He is our example. But know this also, everyone who now walks with God in the Spirit once did not. They wandered, they wondered, they hoped and prayed. Or maybe not, because many ignore the opportunity. They may not have believed or may not have faith that God even cared, but he does. That's the joy of a relationship with him. He cares. And what he does now for people who are with him in spirit and walk the path, he does for every new believer. It's that simple. All right, in our prophecy segment this week, I've got a question from a listener who asks, how would we know when the end of the world is coming? Like, what are the signs? Well, that's a great question, and thanks for asking. You see, prophecy's entire focus and purpose is to inform us and to warn us and to alert us of future events. And most prophecy study requires some digging, some reading, some research to discern the events that God now wants us to know about. The fact is, most people either ignore or doubt or simply don't want to hear what he and his prophets and messengers have to say. Well, why is this? If it's there, why do we ignore it? Well, the simple truth is, when he speaks or shows us, it requires that we trust he's telling the truth. Because we live in a world that does not embrace the truth, we simply turn away. We live in a world that doesn't want us to know the truth. And so many ignore him and what he's sharing. Well, prophecy doesn't tell us exactly when our world will end, but it does forewarn us to be watching for signs to recognize when we see, we will know these future events are unfolding. You see, there's 1,817 prophecies in the Bible, and every one of them refers to Jesus Christ. Most prophetic events have already occurred, exactly as foretold, and yet at issue for most people is that the build-up or stage setting has taken years, decades, even centuries to be revealed. Well, think of it this way. Before you got a driver's license, you prepared, right? You get the driver's manual and you study. You find a vehicle and you practice. And you continue learning how to become more proficient and efficient behind the wheel. So you're fully prepared to take the driver's test when you're ready. Well, the same is holding true for events of the end times and last days. It takes time and incremental steps to set the stage for each of the events described in prophecy. Many people think that the rapture is just going to come out of the blue and it is for those who are unprepared. God gives us three unmistakable, undeniable, and unmissable events or signs of the end times. And he tells us that these are to alert the world that the end is close at hand, right at the door, Jesus tells us in Matthew 24. So here's what those three events we should be on the horizon looking for anxiously. And more importantly, the incremental steps that are going to allow that big event to actually come to pass. So first, when you see a coalition of armies led by Russia, Turkey, and Iran preparing to invade Israel's Golan Heights, the mountains of Israel, and it looks like Israel will finally totally be destroyed, God himself will intervene on Israel's behalf, destroying her enemies. This is a prophecy from Ezekiel 38. Next, when you see a treaty signed, confirmed, and ratified that ends this conflict, the Ezekiel war, the man who will become the Antichrist will step forward and be acknowledged by the world as the architect or broker of this treaty. And that's Daniel 9 in the Old Testament. And when you see the third Jewish temple being started, built, or completed in Jerusalem, know that the end is upon us, right at the door. Not Daniel 9. So when you see these three signs, be prepared. We take our last break. When we come back, we'll talk about next week's show. You're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends on the Bold Brave Media TV and Talk Global Network. I'm your host, Branch Isole. I'll be right back.
Did you know that your beliefs create your entire reality, but it's the subconscious beliefs that do most of the creating? Belief shifter and life coach Shiraz can help you identify those limiting beliefs and eliminate them, often in a single session.
Like it was almost instant, like I had relief right away.
Creating better health, relationships, careers, and finances. Let Shiraz help you step out of safety and into awareness.
Definitely something's happening. It's like a flow inside. It feels good.
Whether in person or online, Shiraz provides personal coaching, belief shifting. Visit Shiraz at energeticmagic.com or call 416-529-7429. Energetic Magic on the BBM Global Network, Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern. Find your greater happiness. Be well. Be aware. Be magical.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Thanks for joining me today. On Small Changes, Big Dividends, we discuss personal, career, and spiritual Christianity essentials for growth-filled living. If you know someone who could benefit from today's episode, please share it with them. If today's show has been interesting for you, please give us a rating and review. And to know more about my work, I invite you to visit my website, branchisole.com, or my YouTube channel, Branch Isole. Today's show has been sponsored by Crystal Creek Farm. If you have a business, a product, or a service you'd like to share with the world on Small Changes, Big Dividends, just send your inquiry to the website. You've been watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends on the Bold Brave Media TV and Talk Global Network. Until next week, keep growing and be in the world, not of the world.
This has been Small Change, Big Dividends. When you're ready for healthier, more successful relationships at home or work, Small Change, Big Dividends is your show. Wednesdays, 4 p.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave TV network.